If you have a Bible, open up with me to Mark chapter 6 this morning. By the way, morning, y'all. Good to see you. It's good to be back after being out for a couple of weeks. We've been in a series that we've titled Curious Encounters, where we're walking through various sections in Mark's gospel, looking at these places where Jesus does or acts in some way that provokes the curiosity of his followers and of the masses, where people can't quite make sense of Jesus, and he causes them to wrestle with who he is, the claims that he's making, the truth that he's presenting in his message and in his life. And as we've said throughout this series, we've really kind of had one goal, and that is if we can stay curious, we'll refrain from becoming judgmental. And one of the tragedies of the Christian life is that we can become so familiar with the scriptures or with these stories about Jesus that we kind of settle into a self-assurance about who we believe Jesus to be or what we believe him to be doing. And sometimes that stifles curiosity and makes us maybe somewhat rigid and cranky in our ways. But hopefully this series has caused us to relook, and that's been my prayer each week as I've prepared to preach. Lord, show me something I haven't seen before. Lord, reawaken my curiosity about the person of Jesus. Warm my affections for him so that I don't have this settled assurance that I know all the ins and outs of who he is, but instead, Lord, provoke my curiosity about the person of your Son. And so my hope and my prayer this morning is that happens once again. We're in Mark 6 this morning at a scene that for many of you will probably be very familiar. It's one of the only miracles that shows up in all four of the gospel accounts of the person of Jesus, the scene where Jesus feeds some 5,000 plus people. And it begins here in Mark chapter 6, verse 30. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples and set them before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and all of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. This is the word of the Lord. So I was out for 2 weeks. My wife and I had our 20th anniversary back in May, and we finally were able to get away and go on a trip together. And we did something different with this trip than we'd never done before on a trip for just the two of us. We used a travel agent. And part of the reason that we use a travel agent is, I don't know if any of you guys have experienced this lately, but it seems that the internet, for a season of life at least, made things like travel really easy and really simple. You could get on a website that would look over everything for you. But now there's like 50 websites that look over everything for you. And anytime you do like a search result, we just get overwhelmed sometimes with all of the choices and trying to weigh all of the options. So I was like, I want someone to find this stuff out for me. But part of the reason we came to that decision was we would go on different sites and read reviews. I don't advise this, by the way. I don't know if any of you have stumbled upon reviews, especially some that have been written in the past couple of years. It doesn't really matter what the situation is. It can be retail, it can be a restaurant, it can be a resort. People are cranky right now. And so what was shocking to me is that reading reviews, there'd be a place that, let's just say a cruise. I looked at a cruise, and it's like a 7-day cruise in the Caribbean, and it's going to go to all these different places. And for 7 days, you do all this stuff, and it's like $500 a person. And then I go and look at the reviews, and someone gives it 1 star. And they're like, the boat was garbage, the food was garbage, the towels were garbage, the water pressures were, just a rant. And I want to be like, hey, you get what you pay for. You're on the western sizzling of the seas. You can't be too picky about things whenever that's what, you can't get Super 8 Motel and Waffle House for $500 in 7 days these days, right? Just get over yourself. Or you go look at the reviews of a place that's like $10,000 a night. And if you don't think those places exist, they do. I go look at them and dream. And then someone will put like 5 stars and they'll say the food was amazing and the towels were amazing and the sand was amazing. And I'm like, yeah, you spent 6 months of salary on 1 week of vacation. If it's anything less than 5 stars, demand your money back, But it kind of clued me into sort of what is a prevailing thing that I see in ministry a lot. And I think it's due in large part because of just being in a affluent Western culture that's kind of bent towards consumerism and materialism. Our expectations have gotten completely out of whack. And not just as it pertains to what we expect of the ways that we spend our money. It happens in relationships. We expect people sometimes to be mind readers. We expect people to live up to really unattainable standards. We haven't communicated our desires or our hopes to another person. We just want them to intuit that by our mere presence. And it just sort of leaks into all of life. In fact, if I could kind of categorize the one thing that trips up the majority of relationships that I see, at least in the local church, it's these unspoken and unmet expectations. Now, I think that if that's true of our relationship with people for whom we trade commerce and goods, and if it's true of people with whom we relate in some sense, it's probably true of our relationship with God as well. In other words, I think it's highly likely that many of us today have unspoken expectations of the person of Jesus. We've never really considered what is fair to expect of Jesus as Lord. And what can sometimes make this doubly difficult is growing up in a particularly religious culture where we view Jesus maybe in line with the IRS a little bit. He's kind of like the agent that one day will show up and audit your behavior. And so all you really know to expect of him is fear and dread and scrutiny. And I love the way that Mark, thus far in this gospel, has continued to give us different visions and pictures of Jesus to challenge many of our presumptions and expectations, maybe that we've never even had the courage to voice ourselves. And that's, I think, what's happening here in Mark 6. Jesus is showing us what we can, in fact, expect of him. What are healthy expectations of a person who seeks and aspires to follow Jesus as Lord? We see it from a number of angles. The first angle I think we're going to look at this morning is the angle of the people who are amongst the masses or amongst the crowds. All they know of Jesus is that he has a reputation for healing. All they know of Jesus is that he has a reputation of being a good teacher. And as John's record of this account would tell us, these people come running after Jesus, not just because he's a good teacher, not just because he has the power to heal, but because they want to take him by force and make him king. And the second group of people that we see are the expectations of the disciples. They've been following Jesus thus far in his ministry. They've had a front row seat to everything that he's done. So their expectations may be truer than most, but even Mark's going to say, not necessarily in this account, but in the one that follows, even the disciples didn't have the right expectations. Even they didn't understand what it was he was doing or what it was he was up to. And then lastly, what expectation can anyone have of a man who claims to be God? That's what we're going to look at this morning. The expectations of the crowds, the expectations of Jesus' followers, and the expectation that all of us can have of Jesus. The first thing that I think that we see, or that Mark wants to make explicit here in chapter 6, verses 30 through 44, is that the crowds can expect of Jesus compassion for the disoriented. Compassion for the disoriented. Where do I get that? Well, look back here at the very beginning again. There's a really interesting setup to this scene in the way that Mark records it. In fact, if you're reading from various translations, sometimes the scriptures will put those, in your Bibles, it will put those bold headlines telling you that a new story is about to start. And depending upon what translation you're reading this morning, that bold headline falls in different places. Because most commentators, most New Testament scholars say, we don't really know where the last episode ends and where this episode begins. Because John the Baptist has just been beheaded. And his death has been recorded. And prior to that, Jesus had sent out his 12 disciples to go and practice ministry themselves. And now both of those episodes kind of come to a fruition, and we're recorded here in chapter 6, verse 30. The disciples, the apostles, come back to Jesus and tell him all they had done and taught. Jesus has commissioned them. He sent them out to do the work that he's sending them to do, to put into practice the things of the kingdom of heaven. And they come back and they report to Jesus, and apparently things have gone really well. They're really excited. And Jesus says to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going," and here's the key point, "and they," that is the apostles, "had no leisure even to eat." So catch the setup. Jesus has sent his disciples out to do ministry. And they go and they put into practice what he's taught them to do. And they come back with glowing reports, but they're exhausted. And in fact, Mark says, they've been working so hard, they haven't even had time to get a bite to eat. And so they get into the boat thinking that Jesus is taking them somewhere desolate where they can get some rest and most likely, one would at least assume, some food. And they get in the boat and they take off. And when they get in the boat and they go away to the desolate place, verse 33, "Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them." So, catch the setup. The disciples have been working, they're hungry, they're tired. Jesus has said, "Let's go get a break. Let's go find a desolate place where we're going to rest." They're assuming we're going to get to eat, and all of these people beat them there. They don't have a reservation at the restaurant, and when they get there, there's a line out the door. Not only is the line out the door, the line's not there to eat, the line's there to talk to Jesus. And so they've got to be in this particular state of like, wait, I thought we were going to get a break. I thought we were finally going to get to sit down and grab a bite to eat. But Jesus sees this, and when he went ashore, verse 34, he saw the great crowd, and here it is, he had compassion on them. Why? Because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Now, that little phrase, sheep without a shepherd, that's an Old Testament phrase. It occurs over and over and over again in the Old Testament, specifically at times when Israel's king had gone wayward, when Israel's king had neglected to do what he had been sworn to do, to represent God amongst the people of God, to lead them in the way that God had told them to be led. And so whenever that phrase would be used, it was often used of a people who had no good leadership. They had no one to look to who would model for them the ways of God. They had no one to look to who would represent to them the truth of God. And so they're people without adequate leadership. In fact, it's often a term that's used in militaristic language. It's times like these that war would happen. It's times like these that people would be completely disoriented. Jesus has compassion on these people, not because of their surface desire of hunger. He has compassion on them because they're void of any true, real leadership. There's no one that they can look to. They don't know what is true. They don't know who's going to lead them in the right way. They're disoriented to the core. So I want to apply this little point real quick before we move on, because I think it's important for us today, for us to understand why it is we can have a healthy expectation that Jesus has compassion for disoriented people. Why is that a right thing to grasp from this particular text? The first thing I want you to see today is that if you are disoriented, I want you to see and experience the compassion of Jesus today. When Jesus looks out amongst the people who do not know what truth is, who do not know what direction to go in, who do not understand who to follow. These people, best we can tell, Jesus is landing in the far side of the Sea of Galilee once again, in Gentile country. To this day, 2,000 years later, it's still a war-torn area. To this day, it's a people who still don't have adequate leadership. No one's showing them the ways of God. And so Jesus sees that, and he doesn't end up on these shores and go, shame on these people. They don't know any better. He doesn't look at them and call them to an account. He has compassion for them. As we've said throughout this series, this is the word that Mark uses over and over and over again of Jesus towards these sorts of people. Splanchnizomai. His guts are moved in their direction. Deep, abiding affection for these people. They don't know who to trust. They don't know who to listen to. They don't know who to follow. So this morning, if that's you, Jesus has compassion for you. This morning, if you're confused, this morning, if you realize, man, I don't know, oftentimes, what is true. I don't know which direction I'm supposed to go. Jesus has a deep compassion for a confused, disoriented people. He sees them, that they lack the godly leadership that God intended for them to have at the very beginning of creation. And he teaches them. He calls them to himself. It says in verse 35, when it grew late, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away and go into the surrounding countryside and villages and so they can buy themselves something to eat." Jesus doesn't do that. He cares for them. So like the listeners in Mark's account, our call today is to run to Jesus, to sit at his feet, to listen to him, to learn from him, and in so doing, receive the compassion that he has for us. You can find hope in Jesus. You can find comfort in Jesus. You can find leadership in Jesus. The orientation of our life is bent towards the things of God when we follow Jesus into the world. But secondly, this morning, I want to pick up on this because I think it's another distinction. If Jesus has compassion for the disoriented, and if followers of Jesus are meant to emulate Jesus or reflect his character and his nature out into the world, then what's maybe going on in us when we're short on compassion? What's going on in us when we look around and we're just as uncompassionate as the world around us, specifically towards people who don't know which way to go? In other words, if you lack compassion this morning, I want you to reconsider your way of framing the world. And that's the contrast that we're given here. So Jesus looks at these people and he instantly has compassion for them. The disciples look at these people and they instantly see an interruption to their plans. Right? They've been working hard for Jesus. They've been doing ministry. They've been laboring, and they haven't gotten to have a meal yet. And they land on the shore thinking that now Jesus is going to take them away by themselves, and they're going to get a good meal. And who are all of these knuckleheads that don't know good leadership from bad showing up to take their time with Jesus away from them and to delay them getting a bite to eat? In fact, you could frame it this way. The disciples see this encounter as a matter of responsibility. Who is responsible for these people? Jesus sees this encounter as an opportunity. Can the glory of God be shown forth in these people's lives so that they're no longer sheep without a shepherd, but they know what godly leadership looks like? The disciples see this as a matter of responsibility. Jesus, can we just send them away? They should be responsible for themselves. This isn't our territory. This isn't our turf. This isn't our people. We're Israelites. These are Gentiles. Why can't we just say, hey, you're out here in Podunk, backwater nowhere town. It's a desolate place. Go find yourself something to eat. We haven't gotten to eat ourselves. Not only that, we're the ones who've been serving you. We're the ones who've been working hard. Why do you got to show compassion to them? We're the ones who've been laboring. You begin to hear echoes, perhaps, of the older brother in Jesus' account of the prodigal sons. Why would you kill the fattened calf for this loser? All he's done is squander his life away. We're the ones who work hard. We're the ones who labor. Jesus, shoo them away. They can take care of themselves. This is a matter of their responsibility, not ours. To which Jesus says, you give them something to eat. Now think about this. Think about this if you're one of the disciples. You've been working hard. You've been doing what Jesus told you to do. And you'd go and do it. And you do exactly what he tells you to do, and it reaps some measure of fruit. There's some harvest of that, and you come back and report it, and Jesus goes, man, good job. You got to be tired. You got to be hungry. Let's go catch a break and get a bite to eat. And you land on the shore, and all of these people who are not a part of your group, not a part of your tribe, not a part of your club, show up, and he starts giving them attention. And then when you come to him and say, hey, it's getting late, we're still hungry. We still haven't eaten, by the way. That was the whole point of this trip. Jesus has the audacity to look at you and say, well, you should feed them. What's the difference? The disciples are framing the world in a matter of responsibility. Jesus frames it in a manner of opportunity. Jesus sees the people as sheep without a shepherd, which provokes in him compassion. Which when he looks out at the world, he says, there's an opportunity here. Not just for these people, not just for the outsiders to be brought in, but for the insiders to see God's glory. For them to see that there's a level of rest and there's a level of satiation that happens that you can't get from a vacation and a good meal. There's a level of comfort you can attain by trusting in the sustenance of Jesus himself that he will then provide that only happens when you lean into him. What if this morning you were willing to see the world not merely as who's responsible for all this, but is this an opportunity for God's glory? What if God has you in the situation he has you in this morning, just simply for the sheer fact of calling you to trust in him, to connect these dots and to pull this thing off? What if? And that's where we get to the second point. I think the disciples are meant to see that Jesus really does want to make provision for the exhausted. If you are tired this morning, and I know a lot of people are really tired, and some of y'all have a right to be tired. You've been dealing with some very heavy stuff for a really long time. And the point here is that Jesus pulls his disciples away, not to embarrass them or not to say, hey, you thought you were tired? Oh, just wait until I make you feed a lot of people with a little bit of resources. This isn't a setup for them. This isn't a gotcha moment for him towards them. This is an opportunity for them to see where real provision comes from, where real sustenance comes from. He takes his disciples on a journey. He wants to give them rest. Remember how the narrative starts. They come away, they're tired, and Jesus says, look, you need a break. You need rest. You need to be restored. You need to be recuperated. But then he allows them to be interrupted. He allows this intrusion into what they would think would be their vacation time, what they think would be their meal time. And he teaches them that in these moments, he can and will sustain them. He has what it takes to fill them up. In fact, I think that's kind of, in some ways, the main point of this whole episode. The whole episode is not just so Jesus can demonstrate his power to a bunch of onlookers from the margins. The whole point is that his disciples will learn, you barely have enough to eat. I'm going to give you a break. You barely have enough. We have 5 loaves and 2 fish, 13 people, right? 12 disciples and Jesus. That's going to be maybe scratching the surface of everyone getting a bite. This is a charcuterie board. This isn't like a full meal, right? But then Jesus, after setting them down, bringing them through this experience, telling them to feed the people, at the conclusion of all of this, what happens? Each disciple collects a bag of leftovers, an entire basket. There's 12 left over. So not only did they just feed 5,000 men, plus all the women and children, who knows how many people were there, but they all got enough to take home. They all got a doggy bag. Think about this. What's the point? Jesus is showing his disciples that yes, rest and recovery are essential for those serving God's kingdom. It is essential that you break away, you stop, and you lean into dependence into the person of Jesus. And we know this because this is the practice of Jesus throughout all of his ministry. So this morning, if you're a work ethic type, if you think that it's lazy to take a break, if you've made an idol out of your ability to work harder than everyone else, hear the caution. God himself established a Sabbath day before sin had even entered the picture. Why? Because people were designed, we're not machines, we're human beings. We were designed to step away from our labor and to observe what God has done, who God is in his character and his nature, and to find deep, lasting rest in that act. Not just in taking a break, but in the person of Jesus. We have to be very careful this morning if your idea of work and your idea of labor makes Jesus seem like a sluggard. If you've become more holy than the only true Son of God, you may want to reconsider your stance on things. But secondly, serving Christ's kingdom will always require of us more than we have to give. That's what the disciples are learning. They've launched out in ministry. They're tired. They're hungry. And now they find themselves in a situation where they're interrupted by a lot of hungry people. What do you do in those instances? You need to be aware of burnout or fatigue or your propensity for apathy. Jesus says, yes, but also in these moments when you go beyond what you have in the tank, when you are asked to go beyond what skills or abilities or talents you've accrued for yourself, when you're asked to go beyond what you have in terms of willpower, that's where God wants to meet you. That's where he wants to supply for you what it is you don't have of yourself. One of my favorite songs, recent worship songs in the past several years, is a song called Desert Song. I think it was written by Hillsong. And it's a collection of prayers. All the verses leading up to the chorus are a collection of prayers. This is my prayer in the desert. This is my prayer in the battle. This is my prayer when I'm weak. This is my prayer when I'm tired. And at the conclusion of it, it says, but this is my prayer whenever God has filled me and resourced me. It ends like this. This is my prayer in the harvest. When favor and providence flow, I know I'm filled to be emptied again. The seed I've received I will sow. The purpose of God's filling us, the purpose of Sabbath rest, the purpose of connecting to the person of Jesus is that he provides for us exhausted people so that we can then be poured out, so that we can then model the life of Jesus for the world to see. A people who can go above and beyond whatever human strength can entail because they are supplied by a God who is not limited by our human strengths. Which that gets us to the last point. What Jesus has on offer for the crowds and for the disciples is abundance for an astounded people. A people who could not have seen this coming. The disciples didn't see it coming. They said, look, all we got is 5 loaves and 2 fish. Send these people out. We're in Backwaterville, Jesus. There's no chance we're going to be able to feed these folks. Shoo them on down the road. Let them find something for themselves, and we'll pick at the little scraps that we have, and we'll make it. They're astounded. Not only is he going to feed everyone, he's going to give you a doggy bag and send you home supplied. Not only that, to people who are like sheep without a shepherd, to those who don't know what direction to go in, they don't know who should be king or who should be ruling, they don't trust anyone or anything. To those people, he supplies what they need as well. Jesus' heart for all of us is that we walk away with more than we could ever have imagined with him. A healthy expectation of Jesus is that he will continue to astound you with his abundance. If at any point in time this becomes old hat, this becomes routine, this becomes a story, this becomes just a measure of habit that we go through once a week to remind ourselves that we're wicked and we're sinful and God's good and great and that's it, period, the end, then we've missed the point. Jesus wants to meet us, and he continues even now to feed disoriented and exhausted people with his mercy and love, even now. Even in this moment, whatever measure of disorientation you're experiencing, he wants to meet you in it. Whatever measure of exhaustion you're experiencing, he wants to fill you up. He wants to resource you and provide for you. And beyond that, he wants, I think this morning, all of us to ask this question. What if the ache in our souls, what if the thing that we can't seem to get a break from, what if that thing that wakes us up in the morning that keeps us perpetually tired, what if that's the place where he wants to meet us? Where he doesn't want to take it away. Like the disciples who are tired and hungry. He doesn't want us to just go get a break from that so that we can come back to the same spot. What if he wants to meet us in that? What if it's there? Have you considered this? What if it's there that he wants to remind us that there is not a reward, there is not a relationship, there is not a promotion, there is not market share that you can get for yourself that will satisfy the burning ache in your own soul? Because only he can supply for you what you need. See, this is why in Mark's gospel, in all of the scriptures, the battle that we all fight is always the battle of faith. Do you believe not just that Jesus can save you, but that he can satisfy you? Do you believe that he has enough resources in himself that whatever ache or yearning or longing you have, he can meet that need? See, that's how this whole thing ends. Look back. Verse 42 is the staggering takeaway that Mark has. And they all ate and were satisfied. Everyone pushed away from the table and said, I am stuffed to the rafters. I cannot have another bite. I am filled up. We came here empty. We came here overwhelmed. We came here exhausted, and we're leaving here full. That's what an encounter with Jesus is meant to do. And the good news for us, church, is that Jesus signifies and seals his love for us each week when we gather in communion. That's why we take communion. We are a bunch of scared disciples, just as the 12 were on the night that Jesus was betrayed, who do not know what to do next, even though we're so self-confident. We're like Peter, I'll never deny you. We all have this ego, this thing within us that says, no, I've got it all figured out. No, we don't. We're too afraid to admit that being scared is not somehow good enough. And Jesus sets down disciples like that who are going to tuck tail and run away, and he breaks bread and says, nevertheless, my body is broken for you. My blood is shed for you. Why? Because this is the sustaining nature of God's grace in a world that is fraught with evil and wickedness for disciples who want to follow Jesus into it. This is how he supplies us with what we need to be who he's called us to be. This is where we find compassion for the disoriented. This is where provision for the exhausted shows up, and this is where the astounded come to the table of the Lord and are fed with abundance, abundant grace, abundant mercy, abundant love, because that's who Jesus is. Father, this morning, would our faith be provoked? Would our affections be stirred for the Son who wants to feed us once again with his body and satisfy us with his blood? Who wants to remind us that whatever level of exhaustion we brought in that's spawned mostly from the soul can be satisfied in the person of Jesus if we'll just trust him with it, if we'll lean into him, if we'll press into his all-sufficient nature to satisfy even the deepest needs that we have. The expectations we're afraid to voice because we're afraid you'll let us down. Lord, would we have the faith this morning to know that'll never happen. You'll never leave us nor forsake us. And your Son and the giving of his life and his death and his resurrection is all the evidence we need to believe him and trust him at his word. We pray these things in his beautiful name. Amen.